Welcome to this lecture on discussing art and gender for medieval period. In today's lecture, I would be discussing with you gendering the sacred and the sensuous. That would be in two parts, part 1 and part 2. Myself, Shruti Vip, a faculty member of Department of History, PGDAV Evening College, University of Delhi. In today's lecture, we would be talking about specifically the Nagara style of architecture and how several Western and Central Indian temples from the medieval period, roughly spanning from 9th to 14th century, saw Nagara order of architecture reaching its highest pinnacle. So, from very simple structures that were built in the initial period, that was the kind of a sanctum and a porch for the worshipper during the early Gupta period, how architecture became more and more complex and massive temples were built during the Chandela period with a huge complex ground plan having multiple shikharas, mandapas or halls for different kind of purposes, as well as growing complexity and growing sculptural decoration of the walls of temples, and all this reached its maturity during the medieval period. So, the medieval Indian temples were far more elaborate, and they incorporated several localized architectural styles, especially under the patronage of regional as well as rural aristocracy, as the tendency of feudalism had been going on since the 5th century onwards. Now, here I would like to mention the comment of a modern theorist, Naomi Wolf. Naomi Wolf believes that beauty is used as a tool to promote the male-dominated society. And Naomi Wolf has commented that the modern, singular and unattainable standard of beauty and perfection, which she has described as the Iron Maiden, is largely used as a method of diminishing women's self-respect, their confidence, their physical and mental energy, as well as their sense of being. So, according to Naomi Wolf, the tendency is not only rooted in the present, rather there were traditions that followed this kind of pattern, and we can very well relate this to Indian art styles, to the sculptural depiction of femininity in Indian art. So, the changes need to be made in such a way that we acknowledge past excesses that create a future in which both women and men can pursue enlightenment, which is free from false views about what it means to be gendered, or what it means to be beautiful, or what it means to have a perfect kind of a body. So, the contemporary fixation with beauty and the contemporary fixation with perfection in the female form has been discussed by Naomi Wolf, and she has traced an ever increasing beauty industry which promotes an unattainable thin body and a perfect hourglass figure, and she has kind of related this to a sense of inadequacy and imperfection among young women in contemporary world. Her analysis of the problem has some resonance also in the study of Indian art. If, for example, we compare the monotonous depiction of voluptuous shaped bodies in Indian art with Wolf's ideas, and this is just a suggestion that how one can very well relate and try to understand and explore some of the contemporary themes which had some kind of historical validity as well. So if we look at women in Amravati pillars, and that is what I'm going to do now, that how in the Amravati pillars there are a number of representations of the enlightenment of the Buddha, and women are represented at each and every stage, because according to Buddhist legend, a woman named Sujata gave Buddha his first meal. So the representation of women in any kind of Buddhist iconography was very important, and in fact there were more women than just Sujata that are represented time and again in several panels that kind of narrate Buddhist history and philosophy. Now, if we observe these panels and this kind of iconography with a closer detail, then we find out that there is an idealized image of women in Buddhist art. And as has been discussed by Vidya Dehejia, this artistic visualization of the entire female population of the village that was probably attending upon the Buddha as being identical. So the general depiction of the females in most of these sculptures is does not kind of show any deviation in the form of the females. They are all beautiful, they all have similar kind of voluptuous figures, and men also tended to conform to certain physical types. It was not as if only women conformed to certain physical types. Now, the Amravati art is considered as one of the three major styles of ancient Indian art, along with the Mathura and Gandharan style. It had great influence on the art of other regions also, especially Sri Lanka as well as Southeast Asia. Now, though there is no archaeological record of the site being directly associated with Ashoka, the donor inscriptions, however, from this monument have indicated that the stupa was probably established in the 3rd century BCE. And the stupa had two main construction phases spanning more than 400 years, with the monument being in continued active use as well as construction activity almost till the 13th century. So, if we look at the depiction of Amravati stupa and the kind of images or the sculptures that are carved on the walls or on the pillars, then we observe that there is a very different kind of depiction of the male and the female forms. While women are generally displayed as, thin waisted and with voluptuous body forms, men are depicted as dwarfs and with pot bellies. So definitely not a very attractive sight to look at. So what we have come across in these Amravati sculptures is the perfect female body, whereas the imperfect male bodies, which was also acceptable as the norm, and hence it was increasingly projected. So we need to pay attention to this discrepancy, that why all the females had to be beautiful and attractive, and only then they had valid reason to be shown in the sculptures, where men as pot bellied were also the acceptable norm. So definitely the issue of figurative perfection is not only a trend of the contemporary times, but we also find it in the past depiction of women. And here comes the concept of idealization of feminine beauty. There are images of the male body in the sculptures, as you have just seen, who are old or fat or not so attractive, but there are no images of women who were old or unattractive. The lesson that could be drawn from this pattern of representation, as suggested by Woolf from the modern magazines, they both can be not only kept at the same pedestal, but one can also draw inferences out of this. So here comes the concept of usable history. How how history has been used both in the past as well as in the present, and how it promotes certain kind of inequality. And the concept of usable history is one that not only promotes inequalities, rather the idea of finding the evidence that one likes and one kind of supports that view, and then using that idea while ignoring rest of the evidences that are visible that need to be discovered. And so the kind of history that is written is hardly objective, rather it becomes a subjective kind of a history writing. And usable histories are very controversial even within the feminist paradigm. Now, the next kind of reference that one can make to this kind of a discussion is that by Mary Wollstonecraft. She had raised a question as to why only one searches, or why do historians only search for exceptional women. In this context, you can say, why only exceptionally beautiful women or women having perfect physical forms were depicted. So the early feminist Mary Wollstonecraft questioned those who searched for such exceptional forms as producing nothing of value, because according to Wollstonecraft, the plight of modern women or the condition of modern women could be improved only if one takes into consideration what the mass of women was going through, what ordinary women were going through, what subaltern women were going through. So it is the history of the mass of women that should concern the modern writer and the researcher. Now, here also arises another very important theme, and that is the theme of a perfect woman, which ultimately further promoted and strengthened patriarchy. Now, if we look at some of the divine representations or the images of Apsaras or Yakshis, they are completely unrepresentative of that mass of women. Their dominance in ancient representational art was specifically aimed at idealizing a particular image of a perfect woman in the past, and this largely obscured the injustices that were done to women through patriarchy, and how this was further getting entrenched through this kind of a specific depiction of femininity. So the lecture is largely going to focus on the interrelated concepts of feminine in Buddhist Tantricism, as well as the concept of Dakini, which was the perfect feminine form according to Buddhist ideology. Then the whole issue of femininity, the idea of Shakti, the question of sacred, the importance of symbol, as well as the whole issue of women. So with these kind of themes, we now proceed further, and now I would be taking up the issue of emergence of Tantricism and how Tantricism kind of became a dominant form of practice in some regions, especially from the medieval period onwards. Now, there was a reason that why Tantricism was being adopted or was being incorporated in Buddhist philosophy, and that was to get hold of more and more lay participation. That means to incorporate more masses within the Buddhist philosophical tradition. So Tantra arose at a time when Buddhism was expanding its social base, and it was kind of trying to become more socially inclusive, though it was always inclusive right from its inception from 6th century BCE. So there was now a more diversified path to liberation that had been channelized, and the monastic Buddhism was flourishing already, but Tantra opened a new path for lay participation as well as for a more active initiative. Now, Tantra basically means an assembly of practical methods which guide the aspirant towards a spiritual state. So, Tantricism made one overcome several limitations that could have been self-imposed in the process of the development of the personality. So, there was some kind of a psychological, some kind of a materialistic as well as physical kind of intermingling of several factors that ultimately resulted in the philosophy of Tantricism. It is in this context that we need to understand the whole issue of the sacred and the feminine. From the point of view of sacred outlook, women were the embodiment of the principle of emptiness as per Buddhist philosophy. So, it was within the feminine principle that there was a perfect amalgamation of beauty, harmony, confidence, wisdom, personal development, happiness, then also some kind of a fulfillment and success in all aspects of life. Who was the perfect woman who kind of had imbibed all these principles? That perfect woman was given the name of Dakini, and all are accomplished naturally. All these qualities according to Buddhist philosophy, especially according to Tantric Buddhism, were accomplished naturally on the way of becoming a perfect woman, or in Tantric words, a Dakini, or a genuine manifestation of Shakti. So, before becoming a somebody or before becoming the enlightened person, a person had feminine qualities within, and this was largely accepted. So, who were these Dakinis? These Dakinis were energetic beings in female form, and they were evocative of the movement of energy in space. They could awake all the hidden potentialities in a human form or in a human being. Now, a very interesting discussion about the tantric consorts and sexualities in Buddhist narrative, iconography and ritual has been undertaken by Serenity Young. So, according to Young, the study of tantric consorts was a constant theme of Tibetan Buddhism, which appeared at first glance as highly liberating to women. So, outwardly it appears that probably Tantric Buddhism was kind of accommodating women, and it was kind of treating them at par with men. Another theme that has been studied by Young is the change of sex from female to male in the quest of enlightenment. Now, the sexual union, which was a very important part of Tantricism, it was involved in the pairing between a tantric practitioner and the consort, and this gave women an equal place as partners in spiritual enlightenment. However, on closer scrutiny, as has been shown by Young, this amounted to nothing but appropriation of the female power, and Young has shown that the women did not act as a partner, but rather they were used as a tool whose powers the male practitioner co-opted to enhance his own power, his own moral and physical power as well as enlightenment. So, one can very well question that how one can assume that there was complete equality as far as men and women were concerned even in Tantric Buddhism. Then the next theme that has been discussed by Young is that of the theme of sex change, which conveys that the subordinate position of the female form in Buddhist pantheon could not really be questioned, could not really be changed. So, there was definitely some kind of rhetoric versus reality, as had been there in the past in several scriptural traditions that we had discussed in earlier discussions. The wisest teaching of Buddhism that can be shared is that one must move beyond gender, beyond all dualities, because Buddhism as a philosophy does not believe in dualities. However, if we closely observe several stories, then we find out that this was more at the level of rhetoric in texts, iconography and rituals. This is what has been demonstrated by Serenity Young also in the discussion. So, Young has demonstrated that how there was an urge to co-opt and control the creative female powers, which ultimately ended up in diminishing women and extolling the virtues of men. And this was not only found in one or two stories, rather a whole lot of discourse related to Tantricism speaks of that. So, here one can mention a few stories only, like the stories of Chandrottara and Sumati. Young has given these two stories of women, Chandotra and Sumati, to prove largely the point. So, both these women had challenged that they could achieve enlightenment despite their being women, because it was kind of a challenge that had been posed to them, that since they were women, they could not really achieve enlightenment, as it was something that had been reserved only for the males. And both responded with defenses that were largely based on the Buddhist doctrine of emptiness, that gender is merely an illusion and what is reality is neither male and nor female. Now, as one incorporates Lotus Sutras in the research, then the story of Sutra of Buddha, who was teaching the 7 sisters, this largely goes like this, that the 7 sisters leaped into the air and they got converted into boys, and then they entered male only pure lands. And in most of the Buddhist stories, there is this reality of sex change, that whenever a woman wants to accomplish enlightenment, then she has to go through a change of sex, and unless and until she becomes a male, then she cannot attain enlightenment. Then the texts like Lotus Sutras greatly insisted that one must become a man before achieving any kind of superhuman power or enlightenment, as male was the normative human, and when a woman becomes a man, it is only then that she achieves a higher status. So, even if we look at Sumati's story, the story was about an 8-year-old daughter of a mayor of Rajgriha, who again had to change her body into a 30-year-old monk, and only then she could attain Buddhahood. So, therefore, and here the dichotomy is that after attaining Buddhahood, she also declared that her pure land would not admit any woman. So, this speaks volumes about the kind of discrepancy that very much existed, and it kind of also promoted not only inequality, but there was more of a rhetorical kind of description that was there in the textual tradition, and the same kind of idealization of the female body, the same kind of idealization of the female beauty is also to be found in the sculptural depiction also. Now, from here we move on to the discussion of women as symbols of fertility and growth. The highlighting feature, one of the highlighting features of the medieval period art has been that the sculptures that dot the walls of several medieval Indian temples. It is not as if the trend only started with the medieval period, as even prior to that there had been this practice, and one difference that one can now point out is that of emergence of eroticism as a very important theme. And as has been pointed out by Vidya Dehejia in her essay issues of spectatorship and representation, whether it was the sacred or the secular, the widespread presence of women on the walls and also the widespread depiction of couples on the monuments of India suggests women's association with both fertility as well as growth. So, with this I kind of end my discussion. Thanks a lot.